Senator Henkel. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Honourable colleagues, I rise today during the consideration of Bill C-15 to speak on a pressing issue that directly affects the financial security of millions of Canadians. Banking fraud. We hear about it in our offices, in our communities, and within our families. Everywhere, in other words. This is not an abstract issue. It is not a theoretical debate reserved for lawyers and financial sector specialists. Behind the figures I'm about to mention, there are faces, families, lives turned upside down, lives shattered by a single click. In 2024,
of 638 million. In 2025, that figure rose to more than 704 million, according to the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre. Yet, these figures capture only a fraction of the problem. The RCMP itself estimates that just 5% to 10% of victims report fraud. The true cost is likely in the tens of billions of dollars. And the trend is worsening year after year. Every dollar stolen from a Canadian does not simply disappear. It fuels criminal networks that then act against Canadians. At a time when we are working to rebuild our economy, we are allowing hundreds of millions of dollars slip away every year into the pockets of fraudsters. That is money lost to our families and to our communities, and money gained by organized crime. But beyond the numbers lies an even harsher reality. Lives are being shattered. Retirees are losing their life savings. Families are watching their emergency fund vanish. Vulnerable individuals are suddenly left without resources or recourse. Les données du Centre antifraude du
Data from the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre confirms this reality. People under the age of 50 are most frequently targeted by fraudsters. But victims over the age of 50 suffer, on average, much greater financial losses. Much greater. And beyond the financial losses, there are significant psychological and social consequences. Distress, shame, isolation. And all too often, victims are unfairly blamed. These people are not careless. They are faced with increasingly sophisticated schemes. Phishing, text fraud, identity theft, or fake investment opportunities. These scams rely on manipulation, the hope of a better life, and a sense of urgency, and even the most cautious people can fall for them. Like other figures, I myself have been a victim of identity theft. My image and even my voice were used without my knowledge to convince Canadians to invest in bogus financial opportunities. I therefore know firsthand the helplessness one feels when faced with this machine. But for Canadians who lose their life savings, the ordeal does not end with fraud. It continues when they turn to their bank and are told that they, quote-unquote, authorized the transaction. They are told that it is their responsibility. They are met with opaque internal policies which vary from one institution to another, and above all, are unfavorable to victims. The sense of helplessness is total. The blame systematically falls on consumers, And the banking system, it must be said, is reluctant to cooperate. Yet the situation is not inevitable. Indeed, when fraud involves a credit card, the law protects the consumer. Their liability is capped at $50, and in practice, card networks often apply a zero liability policy. But when the fraud involves a debit card, an Interact transfer, or an online payment, there is no federal law requiring banks to reimburse the consumer. None whatsoever. In practical terms, the consumer is left to face the bank alone. It is the bank that decides according to its own rules. And it is no coincidence that this is precisely where the losses are the greatest. The Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre demonstrates this. In 2024, electronic transfers and money transfers accounted for over $200 million in losses, compared with around $30 million for credit cards. The conclusion is clear. Where the law provides protection, losses are contained. Where the law is absent, losses skyrocket.
Given the scale of the problem, our Banking Committee examined Division 16 of Bill C-15, which amends the Bank Act to introduce provisions targeting consumer fraud. We heard from witnesses, experts, consumer protection agencies, and public organizations responsible for overseeing the banking and financial system. The conclusion was very clear. The measures in Bill C-15 are woefully inadequate. In practice, the bill largely requires banks to establish their own policies to detect and prevent fraud and to mitigate its impacts. This is a shift of responsibility distinguished as reform, not a meaningful framework for consumer protection. The bill also requires banks to report certain fraud-related data to the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada. However, these data would not be made public. Yet, transparency is precisely what is required to meaningfully change the game. Imagine a public report listing each bank's fraud rate. If one bank reports 1% and another 5%, the consumer's choice would be clear. Transparency would drive competition, giving banks a strong incentive to invest in prevention. Their reputation and their clients' trust would be directly at stake. The minister and many public agencies that appeared before Senate committees described these provisions as a first step. I do respect this caution, but I cannot share it. When losses reach this scale, we are no longer at the stage of first steps. We are already behind. And this is not just my assessment. It is the conclusion of the very agencies tasked with protecting consumers. They are calling on government to take the lead and significantly strengthen the legislative framework. Pendant que le Canada reste attentif,
While Canada remains in a wait-and-see mode, comparable countries have decided to act swiftly to protect their citizens and redress the imbalance of power that has been prevailing. In the United Kingdom, when a customer is misled and makes a fraudulent transfer, the bank must now reimburse the customer unless there has been gross negligence. The burden of proof lies with the bank, not the victim. And the results are already evident. the number of claims for this type of fraud has fallen by around 15% in the months following the new regime's entry into force. Why? Because banks now know they will have to compensate victims and are therefore investing more in detection and prevention. Australia, for its part, has introduced a scam-safe agreement involving banks, telecommunications providers, and public authorities. Here, too, the results are clear. Between 2023 and 2024, the number of fraud reports fell by around 18%, and financial losses dropped by nearly 26%, according to the National Anti-Scam Centre. While other democracies are protecting their citizens, Canada is leaving its consumers to face fraudsters alone. It is situations like these that make me wonder, how is it that solutions exist, yet we are not acting on them? What I want to emphasize is that the fight against fraud is not a cost, it is an investment. The banks themselves lose millions every year. Investing in robust anti-fraud systems protects consumers, but it also protects their own balance sheets. Ultimately, everyone wins. I therefore fail to understand why no substantial amendments were adopted during the consideration of the bill in the other place.
This also concerns a fundamental pillar of our economy, confidence in the banking system. When Canadians lose their savings because of fraud and their bank fails to support them, confidence in the system begins to erode. At a time when our government is focused on strengthening the economy and protecting Canadians' purchasing power, addressing this gap would support economic stability and reinforce public trust. It is my sincere hope that the government will take seriously the message we, as senators, are sending on this issue and act urgently on this matter. Honorable colleagues, it is precisely the role of the Senate to raise the alarm on these issues. Free from immediate pressures and with a long-term perspective, we have a responsibility to give voice to these concerns when Canadians are not sufficiently protected. The proposals made in Bill C-15 fall short of what Canadians have every right to expect. It is time for the government to create a framework that truly protects Canadians, holds banks accountable, and sends the clear signal that Canada will no longer be an easy target for fraudsters nor a playground for organized crime. Merci. Thank you. Midrich.